Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. And today we are thrilled to welcome an Emmy-nominated writer, former co-host of ESPN's Battle of the Monster Trucks, author of the fantastic memoir, My Peacock Tale, Secrets of an NBC Page. Please help us welcome Shelley Herman. Shelley, thanks so much for joining us.
Nice to talk to you.
Well, we have a lot to cover because there are so many interesting stories in your memoir. I read it this past week. It was a fascinating read. But to start with, when you were growing up, were there any interest in show business at all from you?
You know, nobody in my family was in the entertainment industry, but my mother had photo play magazines all over the house. That was, I guess, a precursor to like the Inquirer, maybe even People magazine back in the day. And I saw at least where it seemed like she loved those people and her attention gravitated towards that direction. So, and my dad was a bartender, and he was a kibitzer. I don't know if he liked to joke around with people. He was very loquacious.
Oh, I know the word. Yes.
That's right. That's right. You guys are in Florida, so that's on the road signs. The kibitzing room to 2 miles. So we were always a very gregarious family, and I didn't see anything wrong with putting on little shows in my parents' living room for them. I was not discouraged from that. But no, the thought of me being in the entertainment industry, I'm like 5'0" nothing. I'm not like a supermodel or something. Oh, only pretty girls got to be in movies and TV.
Well, your memoir starts with not a showbiz story, but an incredible one about your flight from London, which helped shape your life. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, it was picture it, the San Fernando Valley of California, 1976. I was working at Sears, and I got my job as a page at NBC. And at the time I had $550 to my name. And I thought, what the heck? I'm going to go on a vacation all by myself. Went to London, saw plays, got the hiccups at Shakespeare's grave, drank warm beer, did everything all the tourists were supposed to do, and attended Queen Elizabeth's 25th Jubilee.
Wow.
And on the way home, it was kind of weird. Let me back it up a little bit. There was this red-haired guy that kept showing up at all the different places I would be attending, the different tourist attractions. And when we got on the plane on the way home, I introduced myself to this person, and I said, we've been everywhere together. We've been to Oxford. We've been to Shakespeare's, grave. I'm Shelley. And he goes, my name is Korn, Korn. And I said, oh, well, there's a character in the book Catch-22 named Colonel Korn. And he says, yes, I've been meaning to look him up. And the book was a novel. It was a fake, person. So we're sitting on the plane on the way home, watching the Alfred Hitchcock movie Family Plot on the plane. And I had this conscious thought, I can't wait till I retire. I'm going to see the world. But until then, I'm going to work. And no sooner did I have that thought than an old guy at the back of the plane got up to use the restroom and fell over dead.
Jeez.
And then the whole parade of like Marx Brothers silliness started with the flight attendant, asking if there was a doctor on board the airship. And the red-haired guy stood up, and I said, I think there's an emergency. You should probably, leave him alone. He goes, I'm a doctor. He was a dermatologist, but he was still a doctor. And he went over to revive the guy, and it didn't work out. And there was this whole comedy of errors. And I thought, once the plane landed, I was safely back in Los Angeles. I thought, I'm not going to wait until I'm old and retired to have fun with my life. I'm going to have fun starting now. And that's how it happened. And Jonathan, since you said you read the book, you know how that kind of came full circle at the end.
Well, yes.
With having had that, my biggest life lesson came from a dead man experience, came back again. So
oh, good grief.
Yeah.
Well, not all the stories in the book are yours. You have a collection of different experiences by many pages, which are amazing. What made you decide to write this to begin with?
I never decided to write this book. It kind of made me decide on the book needed to happen. I still am very, very close to about a dozen pages that, and June 21st will mark my anniversary of becoming a page in 1976. And I'm 68 years old, so I don't mind saying that part. And we've all stayed together, and especially for California, that's so unique to have relationships that last that long when people traveled from all over the country to become a part of the NBC Page program. So when the pandemic hit, we started on Zoom, and we started reaching out to some of our other friends who had moved to other parts of the country. And the stories started happening, and people kept saying, somebody ought to write a book. Somebody ought to write a book. Well, it was like, well, I'm not doing anything. I'll give it a try, because I'm a television writer, but I'd never tried writing a book before. So that was a unique journey.
Well, I want to go back to your experience. So you got accepted as an NBC Page in the program, which was still probably is a gate, and still probably is, a gateway to show business. Can you explain how you got into it and what that program is and how it worked?
The NBC Page program is still considered to be one of the most prestigious internships, for lack of a better term, that anybody could get into. Presently, NBC says that they receive about 16,000 applications a year for jobs that are both in New York and Los Angeles. And of those people that submit applications, there's then a certain portion that are asked to make a 2-minute video of themselves explaining why they'd be good to be in this NBC training program, it was an executive training program is how it started back in 1933. And if they like the video that you've sent in along with your resume and your CV, then NBC pays to fly you either out to Los Angeles or to New York. And they'll do an in-person interview, and they'll pick up the airfare and your hotel, because they realize not everybody can afford to go on a job interview, in these big cities. The statistic presently is 2% of the people who are interviewed get the job, and it's easier to get into Harvard than to become an NBC Page.
Wow. Do you still remember some of the NBC facts you had to give on the tours?
Oh, I feel like the Manchurian Candidate. You touch me at a certain moment, and I can begin reciting the whole tour for you once again. Yeah, well, and again, this was like back in the day, because things have changed so much. Unlike Universal Studios, NBC was a real working studio. The one I worked in Burbank, just to be clear on that. And we had access basically to 4 different sound stages during the day until 2:00, which is when the Johnny Carson's Tonight Show started taping. So we would go through there, and we would, first of all, we made up a lot of stuff. I gotta tell you that, because depending on the tour and what their attention span was, we could either give a technical tour and tell them that, they spend over $42,000 a month on electricity bills and 75 cents a tile if you want to rent the floor tiles, or we can give the gossipy tour about what kind of cars Johnny Carson would drive into the studio. And there was a little mountain that faces to the south of NBC. And occasionally we would say, well, that's Walton's Mountain. And people would go, oh, that's nice. Or we'd say, that's where Julie Andrews twirled around at the beginning of Sound of Music. Oh, that's lovely too. We gave them their $1.90 tour. We showed them a good time.
So you probably cost some people some trivia contests later on down the line where they were reciting false facts.
I'll tell you, I got a job I work writing game show questions for a living when they have me. And I actually got my job working for Mark Summers, who a lot of people remember as the host of Double Dare. And Mark was hosting a show called Unwrapped. And it talked about how certain foods were made. Ever wonder how a Twinkie's made? Ever wonder how a Tootsie Roll is made? And on one of the shows, they talked about the speed in which Heinz ketchup comes out of a bottle. And I was working on Supermarket Sweep at the time. And I thought, oh, that's a good food trivia question, but I have to verify that. So I called the Heinz Corporation, and I got a completely different answer than the one that Mark was told to say on the air. So when I interviewed for my job with Mark, I said, by the way, your people gave you the wrong information to say on the air, and this is the correct answer. And if you hire me, I'll never let that happen to you. And I got the job.
Fantastic.
Oh, wow.
That's great.
Jeez.
So what's it like to just, all of a sudden now you're thrust into a job where you get to meet all these celebrities that you'd only seen on TV and the movies beforehand?
I got to tell you, I was more frightened of not wearing closed-toed shoes at the job, or that my jacket wasn't cleaned properly or something. There was an order to which you had to do that job. In meeting the celebrities, because they were in unguarded moments backstage, there was no pretense. Everybody was there to have a good time. In most cases, the actors were there to get paid, so they were happy to be there. And we kind of served as NBC's ambassadors to the talent when they would arrive. So I remember the first real life celebrity that I saw. I wasn't even quite sure who the person was, but when you tape a game show, you usually bring 5 changes of clothes with you because they'll tape a week's worth of shows all in one day. And I saw this very petite woman carrying a very heavy garment bag. So I went over to help her and took her into the hallway, and then saw the name that was on her dressing room door, and it was Janet Leigh. And she had the dark glasses and the scarf, and I wouldn't have known it was she until I saw the name on the door. So no, people were, I don't remember anybody being a jerk. People had their boundaries.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. No, well, with Johnny Carson, you didn't go over and bother him when he had an office that was upstairs above the studio one where he taped his show. And there was a certain ritual, or he would come down the stairs, usually with a cigarette, and he'd go into the makeup room. He'd go in and get a little touch up, a little powder down, and then he would walk into the studio and then stand backstage before the curtain opened, and nobody bothered him then. That was like total respect. On the other hand, I did bother a celebrity once when it was kind of like I could have lost my job, about the time I talked to Red Fox.
Oh, that's good.
No, that was, we had a woman who would come to the tapings of Hollywood Squares and Sanford and Son. And she was in her 80s. She would take several buses to get there, but Red Fox liked to have her at the studio because he thought she was his lucky charm. And occasionally he would like slip her $100 in the audience and everything. That was just their little ritual. Well, one day Sadie comes to the show and she says, "What's all the commotion next door?" And I said, "Well, Frank Sinatra is on the Tonight Show." And she said, "Frank bailed me out of jail once." And I said, "Come again, Sadie? What? Huh? And it turns out Sadie lived across the street from a very famous hotel in the Valley named the Sportsman's Lodge. And they were having some kind of a rally or a luncheon, and there were a bunch of Nazis that were going to be there. And Sadie got very indignant about that. She went over to the luncheon and she hit a Nazi with her purse and got arrested. So while she's in the holding cell, a policeman comes out to her and says, "You're free, Sadie. Somebody posted bail." And she goes, "Nobody knows I'm here." And they handed her a telegram that said, "Way to go, Sadie. Love, Francis Albert."
Wow.
So somehow Frank got word she was in the clink. So she says, "I've never had a chance to thank Frank for bailing me out." So I'm like, oh, I gotta do this. So
Hmm.
I went over and knocked on Red Fox's dressing room door, and I know he was expecting anybody but me. And I said to him, "Do you know Frank Sinatra?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you guys get along?" And he goes, "Yes." So I told him the Sadie story, and he held up taping of Sanford and Son, went out to the audience, got Sadie, took her backstage to the Tonight Show so that she could thank Frank Sinatra.
Wow,
Oh, good
that's
grief.
fantastic.
Well, I think that was a risk worth taking for sure.
I know, but he was, he was the one that NBC was kind of handling him like a delicate flower because uh, when Johnny Carson moved to the NBC facility in 1972, having previously taped the show in New York, he was upstairs and he wanted a window to overlook, Alameda Avenue, but just to get some light in his office. It was, a cave in there. So then Red Fox heard that Johnny got a window, that he wanted a window, and Johnny had special hours he worked and he wanted to work. So he wasn't always thought of as being the kindest, most hospitable person. So that's why I was a little nervous about doing it. But
Oh, yeah.
I knew I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't try.
Sure.
Oh, man. So there was a division of the pages into different categories. Can you give us a breakdown of that?
I mean, of the job assignments or,
Yeah.
well, we had a lot of different things that we used to do at NBC Burbank. We would give the tours of the facility, and each of those tours would last about 55 minutes. Another responsibility was ushering the TV shows, and that could have been anything from Midnight Special, Chico and the Man, Bob Hope specials. Dick Clark did a variety show. I mean, a lot of shows came through there back in the day. Brandon Tartikoff titled his autobiography "The Last Great Ride," and I think that when my friends and I were there, we had the last really great time seeing all the big stars. And we would give tours of the building, and if there was a Bob Hope special going on, they'd break for lunch and John Wayne would come out or Dean Martin would come out. And where else were these people ever going to see celebrities like that? It was just phenomenal. um, we like to do little field trips also as pages, and we were assigned limo runs. And the limo run would be picking a celebrity up at the airport or making sure they got to their plane after doing some kind of NBC obligation, a press tour, a personal appearance. Or we'd bring them like to the Rose Parade, just again, being the ambassadors from NBC to work with them. And then as part of the NBC Page program, you can get assigned to different offices within NBC to kind of learn how NBC runs. For a while, I worked in the story department where I read scripts for potential TV movies. There's other people who've worked press and publicity. Several of the people I know worked in promotion, which was like, cutting the little on-air spots like, don't forget to watch BJ and the Bear, 10 o'clock, 9 Central Time. They learn those kind of things.
Well,
Wow.
one of the you mentioned about that no one was really a jerk, really, but one of the stories that you do have there was about Harvey Korman, who did not come off well. So in your book, so were you able to share that one about anything?
Well,
else?
that was not my story.
Oh, that was not yours. I know.
Yeah, but Tom Hansen, he was working as a valet at Chasen's restaurant in Beverly Hills, which is sadly no longer there, but an A-list restaurant. And as a parking valet, he met a lot of big stars. And the only one that he thought was just a 4-star jerk was Harvey Korman. And when he left the job at Chasen's, he was like, oh, at least I won't have to deal with Harvey Korman again. And sure enough, Harvey Korman got a short-lived sitcom at NBC, and Tom was assigned to work on the show.
Oh God.
Yeah, there's a job that people do when a show is being taped. It's called the warm-up guy. And in this case on Harvey Korman's show, the warm-up guy was getting a lot of laughs, which is good because it keeps the energy up so that when Harvey would go to tape his sitcom, the people were up to have a good time. Harvey thought it was distracting too much from his show, and he had the warm-up guy fired.
Yep. I have heard stories like that because, you know, because I know historically Steve Martin was also a warm-up act. I think it was at NBC in the early days, and he was kind of a hit or miss thing. But I have watched other warm up acts who were so incredibly funny, and all of a sudden they were gone.
Well, I mentioned Mark. I mentioned Mark Summers earlier. Mark had been a page at CBS, and he did audience warm up for the show Alice with Linda Lavin. And he had done Soap, the Billy Crystal show Soap that was on ABC. So that's where he got his start, was doing audience warm up. And now that job, I mean, a lot of times the producers of the show or the writers of the show will help do the audience warm up. But the people that actually do that job are part of the entertainment union SAG-AFTRA, and they get paid a fee for doing that job, and it pays very well.
Yeah, and it was always a huge opportunity for comics, you know, who were established. I mean, it wasn't someplace you started, because it really is a very important job, and I'm sure people know what we're talking about here. But it's like, you know, you've got an audience in a studio. They have to be there really early. The studio is really cold. It's freezing cold, and I'm sure you can confirm that for me most of the time. And so you got to keep, because people start getting fidgety, and so, you know, this concept about having, you know, a comic come out and do a routine just to get everyone literally warmed up so they are ready to laugh when showtime starts. So it's a really powerfully important part of the whole process. So also, I guess life-saving is also, because apparently you helped save a life in line one time.
Yes. Again, keep in mind, mid-70s, and this new thing called CPR had just started hitting the people's consciousness that weren't in the medical industry. And I said to our human resources person, I said, we come in contact with the public so much, somebody needs to know CPR, because this is a really potentially dangerous situation. So they allowed Tim Danker and me to take a CPR class, and it was fine. I'm glad we learned it, and to this day, I'm still glad I know it. And sure enough, the day we finished the class, I'm standing in front of the line at the Tonight Show, and I hear somebody scream, and they said, somebody's fainted. So it's almost like the $6 Million Man. I was like running in slow motion, and I'm ripping my blazer off because I'm rolling it in to try to make, you know, a potential pillow for him, or maybe I need to use a syringe, or, you know, not a syringe. I need to tie off something if he's bleeding, and I'm running in slow motion to the guy, and sure enough, he's beet red. He'd passed out. It was, you know, it gets very hot waiting in line for the Tonight Show sometimes, and I did the look, listen, and feel to make sure that, you know, he was breathing, he had a pulse, and the heart was beating, and I had everybody, you know, get away from him so he could get the fresh air. And his wife leans down and says to me, "Our son's a paramedic. You're doing a very good job."
Oh, wow.
And we got him taken care of, and we had an ambulance company, took him off to the hospital. And I promised I'd get them Tonight Show tickets for another night, which unfortunately they weren't in town long enough to take advantage of that. And then like a month later, this ginormous box arrived at Guest Relations with my name on it. And I thought, what is this from? I don't have an admirer. So I looked at it, and there was a note was from the guy who I had helped, who had passed out online.
Oh.
And he was the president of the 3M Tape Corporation. And in this box was every imaginable type of tape you could ever want. Things to do little spit curls on your hair, Christmas tape, videotape, which was very valuable back then, videotape, packing tape, decorative tape. It was hysterical. I mean, I was passing it out to all my page friends. It was very lovely of them to have done that.
You have one very funny story. I'd love if you could tell it here, about a limo ride that you took with Eric Estrada, which to me showcases the absurdity of Hollywood thinking. Some of it. Could you relay that story to us?
Well, Eric was working as an actor, but he hadn't become super famous yet. And he just got the job on Chips. And I picked him up at a little apartment in Studio City. And he was, the tight pants and the rolled up shirt and a little bit of man cleavage showing. And we go to the event and the light bulbs are going off and everybody's taking pictures. And I'm escorting him to this holding area where he'll eventually meet with all of the different press and publicity people and the NBC affiliates. Those are the people in the small towns that have the NBC stations. So they can meet Eric and hopefully promote Chips on their station and it'll become a big hit. So Eric shows up and they said, here's your Chips uniform to put on. And he goes, I'm not going to wear that. And they said, well, no, we need you to wear this outfit so people start identifying you as your character, Paunch, from Chips. And he says, would you expect William Shatner to wear his Star Trek uniform if the press were interviewing him? And the press people went, yeah. and then Larry Wilcox came in and he was wearing his Chips outfit. Amazing. And they said, well, we can just have Larry go out and do all the press interviews if you don't want to. And, you could just go home right now. Well, he put on his uniform and had a lovely time. And kind of the way there's that famous video of when Donald Trump announced he was running for president the first time, where he's going down the escalator. Mm-hmm. I was with Eric, and again, he wasn't famous yet, but when he went down that escalator to the press room and I heard all the little girlies screaming, I thought, oh, this guy's going to be a big deal. Yeah.
Wow.
And then a picture of Eric and me wound up in some teeny bopper magazine. And my younger sister, Lori, had a huge crush on Eric Estrada. And when she saw, a friend of hers saw the picture in this movie magazine. And my sister calls me up and she says, you're dating Eric Estrada? You didn't tell me? I said, I met him once. We're not dating. No, it's not a thing. But, there I wound up in a movie magazine like my mother used to like.
Well, we're both huge fans of Gilda Radner, and you've got a great story about Gilda in there. Sorry. Can you share that with us?
Gilda? Yeah, get her
down. Yeah, I know.
Gilda.
I know. That was, pretty elegant of me.
Well, at the time this story happened, Gilda was the #1 star next to Johnny Carson at NBC. And she had finished taping Saturday Night Live. They put her on the red eye to come out to Los Angeles to meet the different press and affiliate people to promote NBC Saturday Night Live. This story does not involve me. It involves 3 of my Page friends. I have to preface it that way. So my friend Pete Hammond, who's a very respected journalist with Deadline Hollywood now, he was assigned to Gilda. And he took her around to meet all the press people. And when the event was over, she turns to Pete and says, I've never been to Hollywood before. I have 4 hours until I have to get on my plane. Show me Hollywood. So Pete grabbed 2 of the women pages, Linda Levinson and Melissa Hunt. They piled in his Mustang. They drove from Burbank into Hollywood. And she was wearing like a little hoodie and glasses. And they went to the Chinese theater and she put her hands in the footprints and in the courtyard at the Chinese theater. They went into Westwood. They got donuts at Stan's Donuts, which is a big deal if you're out here. She had a falafel for the first time. She was dating a guy and his parents lived near CBS in Los Angeles. So Pete and Linda and Melissa dropped her off for 10 minutes to meet her boyfriend's parents. And just as they're rounding the corner in front of CBS, Pete's Mustang ran out of gas.
Oh, geez.
And he's looking and it's like, oh my gosh, I got to get her to the limo. She's going to miss her plane. America's sweetheart. What are we going to do? So Pete says to the gals, get in back and push. And he's driving the car while Gilda and the two girls are pushing the car to the gas station. And the happy ending to all that is Gilda made her plane. Everything worked out right. Pete was very nervous, but then so that was in June. In August, he gets a letter from Gilda, and it's thanking him for this wonderful adventure that they were on. And the letter is in the book. It is so sweet, and it's her handwriting, and it's her humor. And when I said to Pete, may I use this letter in the book? He said, sure. Now, you can't just publish pictures and letters and things in a book. Some of these things need to be cleared. And it turns out, even though the letter is addressed to Pete, signed from Gilda, he doesn't technically own that letter. Gilda still owns that letter, meaning her estate owns that letter. So I had to put on my Lucy Ricardo thinking cap on how I could get permission to use this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful letter. And I went on Facebook and I contacted Alan Zweibel, who was a good friend of Gilda's. And I said, hi, you don't know me, you know Pete. Here's a little something I want to do. Do you know how to get in touch with Gilda's estate? 10 minutes later, he had a private address for me for Gilda's brother. 15 minutes after that, I had permission to use the letter.
Amazing.
Oh, wow.
So yay, social media.
Yeah. Oh, no, definitely. It does have its good sides.
Well, I love how in your chapter on Andy Kaufman, you have a question mark about whether or not he passed away at the end. And you became really friendly with him. You have so many good stories about him. What was Andy like in some of your memories with him and some of your stories, I guess?
I adored Andy. He had just started getting famous on Saturday Night Live. He had done the Mighty Mouse bit. And then he was asked to be on a short-lived variety show called Van Dyke and Company. Carl Reiner, Dick Van Dyke, Marilyn Sokol, Robin Williams was on it occasionally. And they would do sketch comedy. The show wasn't on very long, sadly. And Andy made appearances. So I would see him in the hallways, and we got to chatting. He would do Midnight Special and do a stand-up, do the Tonight Show. And we would meet in the commissary, and we would chat. I mean, it was really funny because I was still living at home, and sometimes he would call the house, and my mother would get all excited. Andy Kaufman's on the phone, and just, Jewish surname. So I showed her one of his comedy bits, and she backed off after that. I didn't have any problems with her. And Andy liked to eat raw cashews all the time, so I was like trying to. I'll eat raw cashews too and try to get along. And they tasted like paste. I couldn't stand it. So Andy approached me about helping him with a bit that he wanted to do. And you may have heard things like Andy went to work as a busboy at a deli once because he wanted to see what it was like to really work in that environment and to hear the actual, real life dialogue that people had, not manufactured dialogue in a script. So he said, I have this idea. Will you help me with it? And it involved him telling the audience, I've been going to barber school because if showbiz doesn't work out for me, I want something to fall back on. So he had me do a bit with him on stage at the Improv. And we got off stage, and Andy was jumping up and down, and he was laughing, and he was like, yes, this is great. This is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm like, I don't get it. What are you doing? I don't understand. Was that supposed to be funny? And it was like 1:00 in the morning at the Improv, and I was going to college. I was working. I lived 40 miles from NBC and had to drive home. And I said, Andy, I can't do this again. I got to sleep. I can't do this. And what we were doing was kind of a precursor to his intergender wrestling, where he would get the audience riled up, and then again, art is feeling, and he'd get the audience feeling something. I understand it now. I didn't understand it then. Oh, and then the other thing which was funny about Andy, excuse me, he told me that he just got hired to do this sitcom and that I shouldn't watch it. It's not very good. You know, don't waste my time. And that sitcom was Taxi.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Man.
I married a guy who was on the first season
Yes.
of Taxi, Randall Carver.
Yes.
God. No, I mean he was so extraordinary, and I wish I had a chance to see him at the Improv, because I did spend a lot of time there, and saw Sam Kinison back, when he was nobody, but the crazy comic they put on at 1:45 in the morning because he was too crazy to be on any earlier. But yeah, Andy was really extraordinary.
How wonderful that you got to see Sam. That's great.
Well, and this is a side story. I'm not going to go into it because this is your show, but my friend and I actually were instrumental in getting him his actual first job as an actor, because we both saw his act, and we said, this guy's just there's something about him. He's going to be huge. And through my friend, got him introduced to a major television producer who put him in his first paid gig, and of course it took off from there. I mean, there was no stopping Sam Kinison. It didn't matter who got him his first job. He was going to get his second, third, and fourth. It was going to go crazy. We could all see it. But that was fun. Those were fun, great days to be able to see, that kind of talent before anyone knew who they were,
It's really strange too, because in hanging around the Comedy Store, I mostly hung around the store, not the Improv.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of people who I really thought they were going to be big stars, and it just didn't happen for them.
Yeah.
And some of them are still knocking around. I'll see their names on the marquees in Vegas, but they just never got that next bump.
Yeah, there's an alchemy to it that no one has ever been able to figure out, for sure. But jumping back to your stories, we've had on Susan Stafford, who was absolutely wonderful, and she had been the first co-host of Wheel of Fortune, and you discuss your friendship with her in the book. She'd been married to former NBC vice president of late night programming, Dick Ebersole, and you have an amazing story about encounters with Ebersole. So can you recount some of them for us?
I set my sights on wanting to meet Dick Ebersole when I first got to NBC. And part of my job was supposed to figure out ways to meet these executives so that we could eventually advance within the NBC hierarchy. So I kept trying to get appointments with Dick's secretary and just was getting nowhere. And I'm driving home late one night, listening to KABC Talk Radio, and they said, our next guest is Dick Ebersole. And I literally did one of those, like, put the brakes on in the car, turned the wheel, got off the freeway, I got to a payphone, because I thought, I've got to talk to Dick Ebersole, and the secretary's not around. So I told the call screener at the radio station I wanted to ask some stupid question about Saturday Night Live or something. And he got on the phone, and they said, okay, caller, what's your question? And I said, hi, my name is Shelley Herman. I'm a page at NBC in Burbank, and I've been trying to get an appointment with Dick Ebersole, and I can't get through past the secretary. And I'm saying on the air right now, will you agree to meet me so that I can talk to you? And he went, yes. So I got my appointment, and I was, all set to be Little Miss Executive Assistant and go in. And the first thing Dick says to me is, leave NBC. He said, that's the career advice I just got here. And he said, they'll value you more if you have outside experience, and then they have to pay you more to come back. And I thought, okay, well, I've got no experience yet anywhere, so I better hang on to this job for a little while at least. And then he had, gone on to Susan and he were married very briefly. And then they were very friendly with one another when their marriage ended. And I went to New York to see Dick many years later, and it happened to be the Saturday Night Live episode when Andy Kaufman had been voted off NBC Saturday Night Live. And it wasn't a good time to talk because they had a different idea of how all that was going to work out. So they were throwing scripts away and running around and like their hair was on fire. So I never got that chance to talk to him again. But I used Dick Ebersole in my brain as an example of how to kind of get along in showbiz, and a very good lesson that my friend Janet Greek gave me when I was in the story department reading scripts for a while. I had gone to Cal State Northridge and I took a shorthand class. And 2 days into the class, I was just sobbing at work. And Janet came over to me. She said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I can't figure out how to do shorthand, and I'm never going to be an NBC executive because I'm never going to learn how to do all this stuff." And she said, "If you don't want to do something for a living, never learn how to do it." And I realized, well, Dick Ebersole never learned how to do shorthand, and he got a good job. So I stopped doing my shorthand class because I figured Dick Ebersole didn't know shorthand.
So going back to the Comedy Store, so they once tried to launch something like this, like similar to SNL or the Groundlings, like the Comedy Store Players you mentioned, and you auditioned for that. What was that process like? And you auditioned with Robin Williams. Do you remember what you did for the audition?
Oh, I remember that day so clearly. Again, I had no aspirations of being an actor because that's something that, like, again, taller, prettier people did. But my girlfriend Lisa wanted to audition. So I went with her to the Comedy Store, and a woman named Toad was her professional name. She was a mime. She was conducting the interviews. And by the way, the Comedy Store Players did happen. That was an ongoing group of people that did improvisational comedy at the store on Sunset. And Lisa and I had known Robin from being in the hallways at NBC. A lot of people don't know there was a very short-lived revival of Laugh-In that was on in 1976, 77-ish. And Robin, before Mork, he was on that show as one of the sketch players on the new Laugh-In. So Robin was up there helping audition people, and Robin saw me and kind of gave me a little look, like a little glint in his eye, and he was like, "Come on, let's play. Let's have some fun." So I was like, "Oh, well." I got up on stage, and it was something about inconveniencing people. And there was a famous line at the time that was on all the commercials of Richard Dreyfuss from The Goodbye Girl saying, "I don't like the panties hanging on the shower rod." And so I did that as kind of one of the jokes. And Robin laughed, and oh my God, I made Robin laugh. That was wonderful. And he gave me like a big, hairy, sweaty hug afterward. And I thought, well, that was fun. I got to do that. And the next day, I get a call to see if I want to be in the Comedy Store Players.
Oh.
And my friend Lisa didn't. And I felt so bad for her because it's what she really wanted. And I had this dilemma going on in my brain about, do I give up my NBC job so I can do improv comedy at night to a room full of people drinking and smoking all night, or keep my executive training program job that I was in? And later that afternoon, I was going over to a friend's house, and I was going to talk about my dilemma. And we were playing ping pong, and I fell and I broke my leg. And usually the phrase "break a leg" is supposed to be good luck. But in this case, I knew I had to stay at NBC because I needed the health insurance. I needed the steady paycheck. And they accommodated me being, on crutches and having a broken leg for several months. So I never did get to do the Comedy Store Players.
That's too bad.
Wow.
So you do have one of the fascinating things I guess I read was you made many friends while being a page, and you remain friends with them to this day, like you just mentioned. But you talk about that even with the pages, there could be like backstabbing. Like what kind of things could go on that like pages backstabbing each other?
Oh, there's this one guy. he was kind of like the Frank Burns character on MASH. And I mean, he had like, his hands were kind of droopy. And he really was a ferret face. And he would sneak around at night and go through everybody's trash cans looking for executive memos, just trying to get some kind of leg up on everybody and just some kind of dish on it. And we figured out what he was doing at a certain point. And he was always ratting us out because we had fun, let's just say that. And sometimes he would tattle on us. And so what we wound up doing is the people who were smokers, we would put all the cigarette butts and all the ashes and stuff in all the trash cans, so that if he was going to get the dirt, we were going to make sure he got dirt on him. You know, he was horrible. But I would say 99% of the pages to this day are very supportive of each other. It's like the fraternity or sorority relationships we all hope we would have had in college. I mean, we've got each other's backs.
That's
we really
great.
do.
Yeah.
While doing this show, you know, since we've been doing, Ike and I have been doing this show, one of the things is that it's always disappointing to hear about certain stories about people that you liked or respected. I guess you have McLean Stevenson does not come off well there at all in this story.
Well, then I did my job right.
Yes, horrible. I mean, can you relate that experience? It's just awful.
See, this is one of those things that is such a touchy area for me, because men have different experiences in the entertainment industry than women. And I was trying to pattern myself after the way I would see men conducting themselves at work, expecting the same results. I had a friendship with McLean before I started at NBC. And it's detailed in the book, and it's very funny, as a matter of fact. And even though he made a pass at me at that time, I made it very clear, nothing but friends. That's all it was ever going to be. So when he was taping a sitcom at NBC, I thought, you know what, I'm going to like sit up in the bleachers and I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to see how they do this sitcom. And then maybe I'll do a spec script, you know, where you write a script for free and hopefully they like it and want to hire you as a writer on the show. And I'm already, you know, preparing my Emmy speech, thanking McLean for giving me my chance as a writer and the whole thing. So I was really all set that if I ever had a good opportunity to pitch myself to him to write a script, I was going to be ready. So sure enough, I get a call, and they said, McLean wants to see you. Go up to his office. So I had a little paper tucked in my pocket. I was all set to go. And I went up to the office, and we laughed a little bit and, you know, talked about how we originally met and stuff like that. And then he reached under the desk and pressed a button, and the door closed. Well, I start laughing. And I, even now thinking about it, it seemed to be so unbelievably stupid, because I'm thinking, this only happens to other people. This doesn't happen to me. And I said, he goes, why are you laughing? I said, well, it's like something that would happen to Doris Day, and you were on the Doris Day show, and here you're on making moves on me, and you're a masher, and you're on MASH. And I'm laughing, thinking that would perhaps make it a less threatening situation. And then he pounced on me, and I got very scared, and I kept thinking, I've got to do something to make him as scared as I am. And I kept thinking, his career, he would be upset if this affected his career somehow. So I said something to him. He got off of me, opened the door. I walked out, and I ran down the stairs, and I had to go work at the Tonight Show. And the person supervising the Page staff that night noticed I was upset. And I told him what happened. And he goes, oh, he does that to all the girls. He followed Sandy Peterson down to the Page Lounge one day. And I'm thinking, oh, not only am I not special,
Oh,
so it was
geez.
like such a weird mind game that and it took me a while to kind of even sort it out, to realize that I didn't do anything wrong. I was being professional. I didn't go up to a hotel room. I didn't get drunk. I was doing my job, and this predatory action happened.
That's, oh man, wow. Well, perhaps moving on to something better. Before
Let's hope.
MTV, there was a great show, The Midnight Special, which had musical acts and comedians, and you got to work on that. What was that experience like?
Well, I'll back it up even further than when I worked on it. When I was in high school, a bunch of us piled in a car and we went to a taping of Midnight Special.
Hmm.
And I remember it was Gladys Knight and the Pips and BB King and Jim Croce were the three people that we saw. And I saw these people standing around doing nothing, dressed in NBC uniforms. And I thought, I can stand around and do nothing. And that's kind of where I got the idea of wanting to be a page, from seeing all of these people. And once I got there, I saw every act I could never afford to go see. I mean, it was people like George Carlin doing stand-up, Steve Martin. It was people doing music acts. I mean, we had to drag people from the Mexican restaurant across the street to come see the Bee Gees just before Saturday Night Fever happened.
That's incredible. Yeah.
No, we got to see everybody, and it was just a really cool environment. And even though a lot of times when the show was over, there'd be a lot of Jack Daniel's bottles and stuff laying around. It was always okay, except there was that one time when the Bay City Rollers came in, and they just, like, it was like a riot. And the page supervisor there had asked, any page is not working, come to Midnight Special, we're having a riot here, we need to control the crowd. And I went to go into Studio 2, and Jim McDonald stood in front of the door and said, "Don't go in there, you'll get killed." It was quite horrible.
I want to know, so how did you come to work at the Tonight Show with Carson?
It was just one of the shows that was in rotation of the different jobs that we were assigned as pages. Now, I can't say it was the first show that I worked. I think they had us working a couple game shows and less important NBC shows before we got to the Tonight Show. But no, everybody was given a chance to work the Tonight Show, and it was quite a large staff of pages who had to work it, because you had pages that were working outside when the people would line up for the show, and the page in charge there was the OIC, outside in charge. And then there would be the page inside, who would be the CB, which was the client booth. So whenever the talent would arrive, that page would have to make sure they got to their dressing room, and if their agents and managers and hanger-oners were around, that they all got situated. So there was probably maybe a crew of about 8 or 10 pages per show that worked the Tonight Show. So that was a large group at a time. And then if you were the page who had the most seniority at NBC on any given day that they did Stump the Band, that's how you got picked to be on Stump the Band.
Well, we've had so many people on who said that off camera that they remember Johnny being like quiet and introverted. What do you remember about him?
Whenever we would be giving tours and we would just happen to be standing around when Johnny Carson arrived, he always would come up with a few quips to tell the tourists. He never was, aloof or anything like that. And I think people were like generally surprised to see he was very fit, and he wasn't, he usually came in wearing more casual clothes. So I think people were surprised to see that too, that he wasn't in a suit and tie all the time. He was very good that way with the tourists. In the moments I would observe him if he was rehearsing for a Mighty Carson Art Players bit, or maybe a comedy sketch with one of the guests later on, he was very receptive to the writers throwing lines out at him to see if certain lines work better, if the director wanted things a certain way. He was not trying to take charge and run the whole thing. He knew who the professionals were at the job, and he respected what they did. Once the show itself started taping, he had very little interaction with the audience. I mean, it's almost like after he would do the monologue, he would say something to the audience, thanking them for being there. But it was almost like watching a pit crew at the Indy 500, because the minute Johnny would sit down behind the desk during a commercial break, they're doing his hair, they're powdering his face, they're giving him notes on who the next guest is, they're timing things down, and then boom, we're back on the air again. So he really didn't have much time to be distracted by a lot of other things that way. I never saw him be cruel or mean or unkind to anyone.
Well, what were some of your regular responsibilities on the show?
At the Tonight Show?
Yeah.
The responsibilities of the Pages, before the show began, we would tape off certain seats that would be reserved for the VIPs. And then always when Johnny was there was always a full audience. But if there was a guest host, say McLean Stevenson, there was a drape that was halfway up the studio stairs, and those drapes would have to be pulled so that if they did an audience shot, it would look like the audience was still full, even though it might not have been full.
Of course.
Our responsibilities once the show began were not to look at Johnny when he was doing the monologue. We had our backs to him, and we were looking out at the audience. And even though it was a simpler time back then, Johnny was still getting death threats. And we were concerned if people were going to try to rush the stage or if they had a weapon. And I always thought, I'm not going to take a bullet for Johnny, but okay, I'll watch.
Wow.
Later, subsequently, in all the studios now, they have metal detectors that people go through, and they check through purses and bags and things like that too. But that was our job. And then people could yell out, like, how hot is it? But if people were getting a little more rowdy in the crowd, we would have to politely ask them to leave if it was throwing the rhythm of the show off.
Well, how did you come to be a part of the sketches?
I was never in the sketches. As the cover of my book shows, I did get to do Stump the Band. But the actors were hired to be in those sketches. And some of the people that worked at NBC were Screen Actors Guild members at the time. There was a guy, Bob Factor, who worked in the mailroom, and Bob got to do several of the sketches for the Mighty Carson Art Players.
That's great. Going back to now, you mentioned the guest host, and you mentioned McLean Stevenson. On that same token here, everyone back then was aware of Bill Cosby. The harassment that he did. They knew it even back then, and no one did anything.
Well, certainly the woman who was in charge of the NBC Page program, Eva Hawkins, knew there was something going on. And this was before Bill Cosby had his big sitcom that he did in New York.
Right.
He was still an important actor at NBC. He was doing TV movies and such. So while Eva couldn't go to management and say, I want my people away from him, she was able to make sure that no women worked on the Tonight Show when Bill Cosby was hosting.
Wow.
And then it eventually came down to the girls or women that were working on the Tonight Show. None of them would be assigned to work with with Bill Cosby either, because a lot of times when people are in their dressing rooms, like especially like men, they're not always wearing their slacks because they don't want to get them creased. And there's an understanding about that sometimes, but if the guys aren't wearing their pants, they're usually covered up with something else, a towel or a robe or something like that. But he kind of would let it all hang out in the dressing room and made no attempt to try to cover himself up that way either. So that got reported back by some of the girls who worked on the Tonight Show. So then only the Tonight Show was sending their male employees down there to work with Mr. Cosby. And I never had an interaction with him, but he wasn't an affable person when he was there. He was kind of focused on what he was going to be doing. And I think, at a certain point, he, again, this wasn't me, it was another Page, a young Asian girl that worked with us. And she went to some of the male pages and she said, I got to talk to Bill Cosby and he thinks I have a lot of potential and he's going to be up in San Francisco this weekend and he wants to continue talking to me. So he said he would fly me up to San Francisco and I'd have my own room and we could continue talking. And the guys were like, no, don't do it.
That's just, wow. Okay. Well, another big famous show business story, the Joan Rivers, Johnny Carson feud was going on at the time. What are your memories of that whole situation?
Well, that happened much later than when I was at NBC. Joan Rivers was a favorite of Johnny's. He really helped mentor her, and she's the first one who would have given him credit for helping her get to the phase of her career where she could be hosting. Now, it used to be when women would pitch in to fill in as hosts on the Tonight Show, it was Helen Reddy, Beverly Sills, Florence Henderson, all women singers who would come out, sing a little song, and then they would host the show later on. Joan got the gig and she was doing a monologue like Johnny would do at the top of the show. So when all the contract negotiation stuff happened and eventually Johnny owned the Tonight Show, NBC didn't own it at this point, Johnny put Joan under contract to be the permanent guest host on Monday nights. There was kind of a little bit of a clash on style there because Johnny was very traditional Midwestern kind of monologues. And Joan was a little bit more like, isn't so-and-so fat? Isn't so-and-so ugly? And there was even, talk at the Tonight Show like, Joan, tone it down a little bit. You're getting a little bit mean and we don't like mean. And she did her own thing anyway. So Johnny was nowhere near retiring at this point. But a memo on NBC stationery was written with a list of names of potential hosts when Johnny retires. Now, the person that I know who saw this memo thought it was kind of odd because there was no women's names on it, but also like David Letterman's name wasn't on it. People who you would think would have been at the top of the list. And in the handwriting of an NBC executive, it said, you have no future here. And this is where, if somebody just would have made one phone call, how many lives would have been different. Because Joan's husband, Edgar, showed Joan this memo. And rather than calling Johnny, her boss, and saying, Johnny, what's the deal with this memo? Do you know anything about it? She just said, I'm going scorched earth on NBC. I'm leaving and I'm going to blow this whole thing up. And it didn't have to happen that way.
Well, we'll move on to something about, something else. You've written thousands of hours for many TV game shows and more. What are some of the shows that you worked on and how did you get involved in doing that?
I started off while I was still at Cal State Northridge in college. In addition to working at NBC, I did an internship with Ralph Andrews Productions. And Ralph had created game shows, You Don't Say, Two on a Match, I think was his show, Celebrity Sweepstakes, and a show called The Liars Club that originally had been hosted by Rod Serling from Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. And in the incarnation I worked on, it was hosted by Alan Ludden, who had also been known for being the host of Password, and he was married to Betty White. So as part of my internship at college, I got to work on the game show The Liars Club. And gosh, if every show could be that much fun. Oh, it was just such a great experience. And I got to see kind of how the workings of a game show took place, from creating the material, because, you know, on Jeopardy, you know, Ken Jennings and Mayim Bialik don't write all those questions. There's a writing staff that does that. And there's researchers who research it. And there's people that make sure the blinking lights on the shows all blink properly. I mean, it's quite a production. So I got to immerse myself in that, so that when I was looking for other work, I gravitated toward that because I now had experience in doing that. And one of the things I realized also is a lot of times people are doing what they call like run-throughs for game shows, hoping to sell them. And I would volunteer to write the material for it, because if you work for free, you can work all the time. And that way I kind of was able to build up my reputation and my resume a little bit about being a game show writer.
Well, you were also the first ESPN female motorsports co-host of Battle of the Monster Trucks and Mud.
Oh, no, you have to get the name right.
Oh. Okay.
You're insulting my sportscasterdom. It was called Battle of the Monster Trucks and Mudbog Spectacular.
I was trying to spit it out quickly, but I couldn't. You know, I've already said Glender, so I wanted to make sure that I got all the words in there properly. So how on earth did that come about? That's just crazy.
Well, I always had a fascination for IndyCar racing, and I thought that if I could learn everything I could about cars, that Paul Newman would marry me someday. So, and that didn't happen. But I knew a lot about cars. Not that my IndyCar knowledge helped with motorsports, but I knew at least how to call a sporting event, or I could bluff my way through it. And in fact, I had a really good experience. We did a show in Tampa, and it was like a 90,000 seat outdoor stadium that we were in. And it was like in January, and it was still like 90 degrees and super humid. I remember that being there, and the crowds were just fabulous. But my co-host is actually a very knowledgeable man named Brett Kepner, and he still does like National Hot Rod Association events, and he's really knowledgeable with this information and helped me a lot. But I think I looked cuter in my red jumpsuit than he did, so that's why I got the co-hosting job.
So you want to know, what are you working on next?
Well, just between us, I'm looking to try to sell my book as a TV series as soon as the Writers Guild strike is over.
Exactly what we were wondering. Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have seen it. It's kind of like I like to say it's like a Sex and the City meets Mad Men set in 1970s. Mm-hmm. I think it's funny. And as guys, did you kind of, I don't want to say learn something. I don't want to think it's like a teachable moment.
I thought the memoir was fascinating. I really, there were so many, and we just scratched the tip of the iceberg. I thought there were so many good stories in here. I mean, they're just like, you can talk about them all day, but it's something that I would definitely be tuning into for sure.
Yeah, we had, like I said, we had fun. when you put a bunch of 20-somethings in a room together with very little money and a lot of imagination, wonderful things can happen.
Well, I hope you do get to sell it, and we'd love to have you back and talk about it when that happens. Good luck. Yes, absolutely. Fingers crossed. I would love to see that. And how can people follow you on social media?
My website is My Peacock Tale, spelled Tale, mypeacocktale.com. I'm on a Facebook page that's My Peacock Tale, and I'm around.
Well, again, the book is My Peacock Tale: Secrets of an NBC Page. Definitely go out and buy it. It's fantastic. If you love showbiz stories, there are plenty in here.
And a couple good sex stories too.
Yes, there are. I didn't bring those up today, but they're definitely. But again, Shelly, thanks so much for joining us today. It was such a treat to get to talk to you. Loved the book, and I definitely, again, thanks you for coming on, and I hope everyone goes out and buys this.
Thank you guys a lot.
Well, I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and this has been Pop Culture Retro, along with our special guest, Shelley Herman, and please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.